Most people think cameras capture reality. A frozen moment in time, a simple photograph. But what happens when a camera starts seeing things that aren't supposed to be there? Turn down the lights, get comfortable, and remember. Sometimes the scariest things aren't hiding in the dark. Sometimes they're hiding in plain sight. This is I scan 3D rooms for a living. The rooms tried reaching out to me. I've been surveying, scanning, and processing apartments and homes for the past year. If you've ever searched for a new apartment online, you've probably seen an option to walk through the apartment on your screen. Similar to Google Earth, you can click and drag your way throughout the apartment space to get a better perception of what you are walking yourself into. It is especially useful if you live across the country and can't afford a visit. It's my job to come into the apartments, tidy them up, though the tenants usually do that for me, take several pictures of each nook and cranny, and digitize them later through a processing software. It pays well overall, though can be tedious at times. For readers interested more in the process, the camera itself is called a Matterport. It uses strong optical sensors and AI to construct high-quality visuals replicating a space in 3D, creating an essential twin space, matching proportions and lighting of each room. It was revolutionized by AI this past year when it was able to stitch together spaces outside of each photograph's peripheral vision. It is less like a series of photographs and more like a digitized copy of a physical plane, as though our reality was simply copy and pasted into a hard drive. The process to do all this is easy enough, though it can take several hours just to photograph and replicate one house, let alone an entire apartment building. The Matterport is an expensive piece of equipment, but thankfully most landlords in the city will pay top dollar to ensure they get new gentrifiers to move into run-down neighborhoods. Most of the time, the building I scan is nice, or at the very least unimpressive. Every now and again, I get a building that feels off. Earlier this week, I was hired by a new group looking to survey an old housing complex. That happened this week when I visited Corcoran Estates, a small housing facility, with only 4 stories throughout the complex. Each floor had only one apartment, all 4 of which ran parallel to the building's dilapidating staircase. It was built in the 20s, but the building's owner never built an elevator, so I'd have to climb that throughout the job. It wasn't Section 8 housing, but it might as well have been looking from the outside in. The yellow trim of the dingy concrete walls were only outdone by the stained glass of the front door. I'm not proud to say that I'm a bit of an alcoholic. I arrived drunk at this job. Hell, I'm drunk even as I write this out. It's the only thing keeping me from panicking. All I can do is wait for the police to arrive and write this down drunk before I forget everything sober. I recall the flimsy, white sign on the building's front entrance reading, "Welcome Home," in big red cursive letters, the kind of font you might see on a first-grade classroom's walls. It made me a bit sad, as though it were sincerely wanting to make you better despite knowing how flawed the building was. The lobby, if I can call it that, was just as welcoming. Dimly lit fluorescent lights lurched over me, their buzzing almost oppressive to my ears. I stared face to face with the first-floor apartment. I stepped as I could hear my own breathing race from the heavy stench in the air. Whoever ran this joint clearly needed deep clean. Each light I passed under got even louder as I got to the door of apartment 1. Mike, the landlord and owner of the property, resided here. When I knocked on the door, it took Mike almost a minute to answer. On introductions, Mike seemed like a regular guy, a typical working stiff who manages and fixes things in his free time. He was fairly taller than me, though I am 56. His eyes were pale, with a narrow nose giving his face an elegant appearance. If it weren't for his Miller Lite wife beater, one might assume he had more success, charm, and wealth than he let on. I remember asking myself what a guy like that would be living in a dump like this, but shirked it off. You can't judge a man without knowing him. "Hey man," Mike started, "I really appreciate taking the time to do this for me. It wasn't cheap, but I really need more tenants to move this year or I'll have to sell. I know people hate landlords, but times are tough out there even for us. Yeah, right, I thought to myself. Mike continued, feel free to scan my apartment last just to get that out of the way. I've tidied up the 3 apartments above me. If you could just, do your thing and get back to me as soon as possible, that would be great. I track each process compression on my phone. Once I gathered as much space as I could on the floor, I moved up to the second floor. It was quiet, but put together as one might expect a wealthy grandparent's home would be. The walls gleamed with fresh wallpaper, intricately designed with golden vines hanging loosely from the ceiling's cove. The room itself was pale, not like the sultry color of Mike's apartment, but moon-like. For such a shabby building, I was impressed by Mike's level of detail and style. The room left a new comfort for my surroundings. Halfway through the scanning, the Matterport pinged with an error message. Image processing incomplete. I've seen this only a few times. It normally pops up when a large object obstructs the view of the camera. The only problem was that the Matterport was left in the middle of the bathroom. A single shower, a toilet, and a broad sink was all that was needed to be scanned. Whatever glare coming from the shower doors must have been interfering with my equipment. Looking at the processed replicant on my phone, it seemed the distortion stood squarely in the shower. I scanned it several times until the distortion went away. I remember thinking it was strange. Moving to the third floor, I felt as though I had entered an entirely new era of development. Moving up the staircase, the walls of the building shifted to an almost ethereal blue tone. If the second floor was golden like the sun, this floor was as fluorescent as the full moon at night, with dark stripes folding below each pane of the floor's windows. Inside the third-floor apartment were birds, a lot of birds. From statues to paintings, the room was almost entirely covered with foul imagery. Scanning the room itself, the notable swan lamp stood firm, as though emboldened by the fact it was the largest one in its flock. Its long neck gawked forward, impressing itself over the lofty bed it loomed over. Image processing incomplete. This time, the shadow was over by the bed. Unlike the second floor, it was splayed across the bed, as if it were resting soundly. I was concerned at this point for the Matterport's internal processor. Moving to the fourth floor, I could tell it was a rush job unlike its 2 predecessors. The wallpaper itself looked thin, with the plaster beneath leaving specked clots all across the interior design. The bleak door between the hallway and the apartment was all that was left between me and my paycheck. The room itself felt haphazard. The door itself didn't shut all the way, rasping out once pushed forward again and again. The walls were dark, much darker than the previous. The ebony furniture and chairs were old, almost splintered along the legs and flat tops. Looking towards the kitchenette was a mid-20th century stovetop, sticking out like white porcelain. I took little time to question my unkempt surroundings at the moment and continued to scan. Image processing incomplete. This time, the figure hovered over the stovetop, not sitting or hovering like the last 2. This time, it was sectioned out neatly in random sizes across the counter space. I moved on, back down to the first floor. I scanned Mike's apartment. He kindly waited outside as I was working, every now and then peeking back inside eagerly. Mike's apartment was neater than you'd think despite the first floor's initial appearance. The walls were beige, limited furniture, with a few bowls filled with leftovers from what I assume were his minor attempts at stir-fried rice. Much like himself, the room itself was basic, and frankly, soulless. Image processing incomplete. I don't recall much of that night, but sure as I am looking at this screen, there stood 3 unformed patterns in Mike's room. One standing upright, another splayed on the ground near his shower, and another set of smaller spaces lined across his stovetop. Looking back at Mike, I saw his eyes first. I may have been woozy from the liquor or lack of fresh air, but I swear it was as though his eyes were painted on. Well, what do you see? I left soon after, saying that the images were processing and that I could get back to him next week. That was 7 days ago. I still think about the voids that the Matterport could not scan. Mike sent an email this morning. You found them, didn't you? I'm not sure what to make of any of this. All I know is Mike is still watching me, like the walls of his building. I've alerted the authorities that Mike was hiding something, though I couldn't show. Whatever memories hid in his apartment were clearly trying to reach out. I have to go now. Mike just followed up. If you enjoyed tonight's story, leave a like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments. Would you have gone back to investigate Mike's building? Or would that email have been enough? Until next time, lock your doors.